Beneath the streets of Cincinnati, Ohio, there is a fully constructed subway system. It has tunnels, it has stations, it has platforms. It has never carried a single passenger. The tunnels were built nearly a century ago. They are structurally sound. They run for approximately 2 miles beneath one of the Midwest's oldest and most densely built cities. And yet, on any given day, they sit completely empty, silent, and sealed. Why was a subway built in full and then simply abandoned? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. Cincinnati's story begins with water. Long before Ohio was a state, the land at the confluence of the Licking River and the Ohio River was a natural point of exchange. Indigenous peoples of the Ohio Valley had moved through these corridors for centuries. When American settlement began in earnest in the 1780s, the logic was the same. The river made this a place where goods could accumulate and move. The city incorporated in 1802. Within 2 decades, it was growing faster than almost any city in the young republic. By the 1840s, Cincinnati ranked among the largest cities in the United States, named alongside New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore in national comparisons. The Ohio River carried goods north and south. Manufacturing deepened. The city became the center of the American pork processing industry, with such dominance that it earned the nickname Porkopolis. It was unglamorous. It was enormously productive. The Miami and Erie Canal was a defining piece of that infrastructure. Completed in 1845, it stretched from the Ohio River near Cincinnati north to Toledo on Lake Erie, a direct inland waterway through the heart of Ohio. For a generation, it worked exactly as intended. Goods moved. Industries clustered along its banks. The canal system gave Cincinnati reach beyond the river. Then the railroads arrived. The first rail connections reached Cincinnati in the 1840s. By the 1860s, the canal was visibly losing the competition. Railroads moved faster. They operated through winter. They didn't require locks or seasonal water levels. Traffic on the Miami and Erie Canal declined steadily through the 1870s and the 1880s. By 1903, the canal was formally abandoned in the Cincinnati section. The physical channel, a trench cut through the middle of a dense, built-up city, remained. The state eventually transferred the canal bed to the city for essentially nothing. Cincinnati kept growing through the late 19th century, though its national ranking had slipped. Chicago's rise as the Midwest commercial center reoriented regional trade. Cincinnati was no longer dominant, but it remained substantial. Population increased, industry deepened. The city filled in toward its natural boundaries. The Ohio River to the south, a ring of hills to the north and east. These hills, which had shaped settlement patterns since the city's founding, now created a specific urban problem. Movement in and out of the basin was constrained. There were limited corridors. Streetcars had served Cincinnati since the 1860s. Electric streetcars arrived in 1889 and quickly became the city's primary transportation network. Lines ran on virtually every major corridor. They were, by the first decade of the 20th century, completely overwhelmed. Rush hour in downtown Cincinnati meant gridlock, packed platforms, and delays that made the entire system unreliable. The topography that had defined the city's shape made the problem structurally difficult. The basin was dense, the approaches were limited, and every car and streetcar converged on the same narrow corridors. City planners looked at the abandoned canal bed running through the urban core and recognized something remarkable. It was already dug. It ran directly through the area of highest density. If it were covered over, electrified, and fitted with stations at key intersections, it could carry people quickly beneath the congested surface, without adding a single vehicle to the streets above. The proposal was studied for years. The demand was real. The physical logic was sound. In November 1916, Cincinnati voters went to the polls and approved a bond measure to fund it. Construction would begin. Cincinnati would build its subway. So what went wrong? Most people, when they learn about the Cincinnati subway, assume the same thing. The Great Depression killed it. That is the intuitive answer. The Depression derailed enormous amounts of American infrastructure across the 1930s. It makes sense as an explanation, but that is actually not the reason. The Cincinnati subway was already dead by the time the Depression arrived. It died in 1927, 3 years before the stock market crash. It did not die from an economic collapse. It died from two forces that operated simultaneously and reinforced each other: a fixed budget set before a major price shock, and a political deadlock that no institution in city government had the authority or the will to resolve. Here is the precise sequence. In November 1916, Cincinnati voters approved a bond measure of $6 million to fund a rapid transit system. $6 million was a meaningful sum. City engineers had studied the project carefully. The canal bed provided a ready-made route. Projected costs, based on 1916 construction prices, were manageable within the approved figure. The vote carried. The city had its mandate and its money. Then came the war, and then came the inflation. The United States entered World War I in April 1917. Construction material costs surged. Labor prices rose. Supply chains were disrupted. After the armistice in November 1918, the inflation did not stop. It accelerated. Between 1916 and 1920, construction costs in American cities roughly doubled. The $6 million approved in 1916 represented, by 1920, approximately half its original purchasing power. The city had not changed its budget. The economy had changed the budget for it. Construction on the Central Parkway section broke ground in 1920. Work proceeded along the former canal bed. Tunnel segments were formed. Station shells were roughed in. The basic underground infrastructure took shape over several years, but the bond money was eroding in real terms with every passing month, and the full scope of the project, a complete loop with surface extensions serving major neighborhoods, could not be delivered on what remained. At the same time, the city faced a separate, equally damaging problem. It had no operator. The Cincinnati Street Railway Company held the franchise for all surface streetcar lines in the city. The plan, consistent with transit practice in American cities at the time, was for the city to build the subway with public bond money and then contract with a private company to operate it. The city and the Street Railway Company needed an operating agreement, terms for fares, revenue sharing, service obligations, and liability. These negotiations began, collapsed, were restarted, and collapsed again. The Street Railway Company faced its own financial pressures as automobile use cut into ridership. The city faced political constraints around what terms it could offer. Neither side reached an agreement that both found acceptable. Each failed negotiation consumed months. Each month consumed more of the shrinking bond. The two problems fed each other. Without an operator, the city could not finalize station designs or fare infrastructure. Without finalized designs, cost estimates kept shifting. Without stable cost estimates, the political will to seek additional funding never materialized. By 1927, the bond money was gone. Approximately 2 miles of tunnel had been constructed. No station was operational. No operating agreement had been signed. The system could not open. Returning to voters for additional funds required a political credibility the project no longer possessed. That is why the Cincinnati subway looks the way it does today. But the bond failure was only part of the story. As Cincinnati attempted to reckon with its stranded tunnel through the 1930s, a separate transformation was quietly locking itself into the city's future. The automobile had already arrived. By the 1920s, car ownership in American cities was rising faster than virtually any planner had anticipated. Cincinnati's topography, the same hills and river geography that had made surface transit so difficult, created identical problems for cars. Congestion shifted from streetcar platforms to roadways. The city's natural bottlenecks did not disappear because the mode of travel changed. The federal government's response to post-war suburban growth and automobile pressure would reshape American cities for the rest of the century. In June 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, authorizing the interstate highway system and establishing federal funding at 90% of construction costs. For states and cities, the financial logic was simple. Building expressways was nearly free. Building transit was not. No equivalent federal subsidy existed for rail or bus infrastructure on anything like the same scale. Cincinnati moved quickly under the new program. Interstate 75 extended through the Mill Creek Valley on the city's west side. Interstate 71 cut through the eastern approach to the urban core. Together with connecting routes, the expressway network restructured movement in the Cincinnati region around the private automobile, with a permanence that earlier car growth had only suggested. The consequences for established neighborhoods were severe and documented. The construction of I-75 and associated urban renewal projects through the West End, a densely populated, predominantly African American community that had been one of Cincinnati's most significant black neighborhoods since the early 20th century, displaced thousands of residents and destroyed a substantial portion of its housing stock. Demographic studies of the West End, conducted in subsequent decades, consistently trace this displacement to mid-century infrastructure decisions. The physical restructuring reinforced itself economically. As higher-income residents relocated to suburban areas served by the new interstates, Cincinnati's municipal tax base declined. The region fragmented into dozens of separate municipalities in Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, each with competing fiscal interests and no shared transit authority. A 2019 analysis by the Transit Center, a national transit research organization, found that Cincinnati ranked among American cities where workers earning below the regional median face the longest average commute times relative to distance, a direct consequence of a bus system operating at low frequency across a dispersed geographic area. Proposals to repurpose the original subway tunnels surfaced periodically through the mid-20th century. One plan proposed converting part of the tunnel into a highway connector. Another suggested use for flood control. None advanced past preliminary review. Engineering assessments conducted in the 1990s found that adapting the century-old tunnel infrastructure to modern transit standards would require expenditures estimated in excess of $2 billion, far exceeding any practical benefit the asset could provide. This created a second layer of consequences the city is still living with today. Everyone who follows American urban transit has heard the same thing about Cincinnati. It is a car-dependent city with a transit network fundamentally mismatched to its population density and geography. That reputation is backed by data. The Texas A&M Transportation Institute's Urban Mobility Report, which tracks congestion costs across American metropolitan areas annually, places the Cincinnati region among Midwestern metros where commuters lose significant hours each year to traffic delay compared to free-flow conditions. The institute converts lost time and excess fuel consumption into aggregate economic cost. For comparable Midwest metros, annual regional losses run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The transit alternative is limited in reach. The Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority operates an almost entirely bus-based system. Service outside the urban core is sparse. Frequency on most corridors is low enough to make transit impractical for time-sensitive trips. A 2019 analysis by the Transit Center found Cincinnati among American cities where low-income workers face the longest average commute times relative to the actual distances involved, an indicator not of sprawl alone, but of insufficient service frequency. The physical structure of the problem compounds it. Decades of highway-oriented investment have produced a land use pattern that is genuinely difficult to serve with transit. Density is insufficient along most corridors to justify frequent service. Insufficient frequency cannot attract choice riders. Low ridership constrains political will to increase service. The cycle is self-reinforcing, and the built environment that drives it cannot be changed quickly. Beneath it all, 2 miles of sealed tunnel runs silent under Central Parkway, built in full and never used. Cincinnati is not standing still. In September 2016, the Cincinnati Bell Connector began service. The streetcar line runs 3.6 miles through the urban core, linking the Banks riverfront development on the Ohio River to the Findlay Market neighborhood to the north. The project cost approximately $148 million. Ridership in its early years was modest. The line operates in a limited geography, in a region built comprehensively around the car, but it established, for the first time in nearly a century, that Cincinnati could build and operate fixed rail transit infrastructure. The more consequential changes are taking place at the system level. The Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority has undertaken a comprehensive service redesign called NextGen, which restructures the existing bus network around frequency and connectivity, rather than geographic coverage. Advocates for the redesign estimate that the highest frequency corridors under NextGen could see ridership increases in the range of 30 to 40% on affected routes. Implementation has proceeded in stages from 2020 onward. At the regional scale, the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments has developed studies for bus rapid transit corridors connecting Cincinnati's urban core to major employment centers across the tri-state region. State-level analysis suggests that functioning BRT along primary corridors could reduce regional vehicle miles traveled, though projected outcomes vary significantly depending on land use and ridership assumptions. The original subway tunnels remain sealed. Engineering assessments consistently conclude that the cost of modernizing the century-old infrastructure exceeds any recoverable value. The next question is whether the reforms now underway arrive fast enough and extend far enough geographically to change daily life for the residents who most depend on public transit. Cincinnati's story is the story of a fixed budget colliding with an unfixed economy and a political deadlock that outlasted the window to act. The $6 million bond approved in 1916, sized to pre-war construction costs, could not survive the inflation that followed the armistice. The franchise dispute with the Street Railway Company consumed the years that remained. By 1927, both obstacles were clearly irresolvable, and the city had a subway with no way to finish it. The highways that followed locked in the alternative. The consequences compounded across decades. Cincinnati is not the only American city that built transit infrastructure it could not open or use. Detroit built one too, and for an entirely different reason. Why does a city synonymous with the automobile have a functioning elevated rail loop that has operated since 1987 and still serves almost no practical transit purpose? Click here to find out.